Welcome to the Grand Central Sports Hub, episode 8.5. I'm Seth Cantor in the dungeon in Dumont, down in the heart of Texas, Austin, Texas to be exact. Jason Richie, as the dogs are participating tonight. Hank and Abby, did you not give them their dinner yet, Jason? Is that why they're going berserk?
They eat very well every day of the week. They've already had dinner. 8.5. It reminds me, 8.5. We were in third grade, Seth?
Yeah.
8.5. Good evening to you from 90-degree deep into Texas here. You know what that means when it's 90 degrees? It's Natter Day season, my friend.
Yeah. Natter Day and some barbecue. So we got a busy show. Rich Coutinho, very happy to have the Mets beat reporter for 98.7 ESPN Radio New York with us. He's been there for 14 years, does a great job. We actually have a live sport that you can bet on, and that's NASCAR. Diamond Dan is going to join us, and then we're going to do a start bench cut. It seems like the possibilities with this feature that you came up with are endless. We're going to do a start bench cut arena edition, and that's going to come up a little later. But Jason, we start with baseball and the plan that owners approved Monday for baseball's potential return. And I don't use that word potential firmly because it seems like there's some hurdles here that are happening. 82 games, the universal designated hitter, as I run down the rules, playoff expansion from 10 to 14 teams, home stadiums where it's okay to play, June spring training with no games, a geographical schedule, interdivision, interleague in the same area, a 30-man roster, taxi squad up to 50. And then the big one, and this could be the major sticking point here, a 50-50 revenue split between the owners and the players. It's already been contested by Tony Clark, and you hear some players like Sean Doolittle speaking out, along with Trevor Bauer, Blake Snell, the latter two bigger personalities in the game. So we start with this. What are your thoughts on the stalemate the owners and players seem to be at right now?
Well, the easy one to talk about first is the money, because that is going to be the biggest sticking point. But there's a couple here. But real quick, because it's the end-all be-all with the money. Earlier in March, the players and the owners did agree to a prorated salary structure for this season, Seth. Now the owners are going back, and it's interesting. It could sound like guys like Snell and Doolittle are being difficult. They are the employees at the end of the day. Yes, they make a lot of money. The owners make even more money. So there's been a lot of brushback on the players here for coming out so strongly against this proposal. But don't you forget how rich the owners are here. And supposedly there was already an agreement in principle. The owners have gone back, kind of wanted to renegotiate, came up with this 50-50 revenue sharing split, and the players are not happy. And when the CBA is going to expire this year, they're opening themselves up to making concessions that they may never get back. So while it is very easy to go out and say, oh, Blake Snell may be crying, let me tell you, I totally understand him protecting his viewpoint and his future. It's not just about this year, but he's protecting his future as well. And on top of that, there is a health concern here, okay? They're not playing under normal conditions. So if they're going out there and assuming the risk, they also want to protect that their finances aren't taken away on top of that, Seth. It's a very difficult situation. I do see both sides. At the end of the day, I'm starting to side with the players here.
It's interesting because the court of public opinion usually leans towards the owners. I will say this.
Which I never understood, though. The owners are billionaires, right? I don't get it.
I'm looking back. My perspective is the 94 strike. You remember the vitriol that was directed towards the players. I think it's important to understand a couple of things here. I think out of all the four sports, hockey's had a couple of work stoppages, but I think the relationship between the owners and players out of the four sports, you could make the argument that it's the most strained in baseball. There's bad blood. There's lingering bad blood between the owners and the players dating back to the Marvin Miller days where he challenged the reserve clause, the 81 strike, 94 strike with Don Fear. I think the union, because there's a collective bargaining issue, remember, more so than this, there's a collective bargaining issue in play for next year. And I think what the union is doing, and I do think it's a smart move on Tony Clark's behalf, I think the union's doing some posturing. They have a new CBA up for negotiation in 2021. And from everybody that I've talked to and every article I've seen to read on the issue, that one could be very acrimonious to the point where some think that there could be a strike next year. So the players, they don't want to give too much right now. They don't want to set a precedent by giving away too much. I will say this. It's a battle between millionaires and billionaires. And the perception in a situation like this, where nearly 100,000 Americans have died, people are online at food pantries. I think if this gets too ugly, I think baseball is going to lose people because people don't care about that right now. The guy online at a food pantry doesn't care about revenue sharing. The guy in New York State who's been trying to collect unemployment for 2 months now, and I know plenty of them, they don't care about revenue sharing. They just want to play baseball. They're talking about 5 months here. It's a one-time deal, 5 months. Figure it out. Figure it out.
That's a great. I was just gonna say, at the end of the day, while I said, I may be siding with the players. I just figure it out because at the end of the day, I don't want to hear your belly aching from either side, right? Because you have common Americans that are out on the street who just want to watch some freaking baseball, right? And you're getting paid millions of dollars, or you're making billions of dollars. Well, you have a record amount of people out of work and in bad health. So, you know what? Let's find a way to get on the field. And when I say let's find a way, let's do it this week. Don't drag this out.
Right.
Come to an agreement. When we sit here next Thursday, Seth, these two sides better have figured it out, or people aren't going to care anymore. They're going to lose their opportunity.
Well, you remember the apathy after 94. People would go to the ballpark in 95, and the ones that did go, there was a lot of vitriol towards players that attendance was down 20%. This is a different circumstance, but I do think the longer this drags, I do think the perception is that the players are being greedy. I will say this about Snell. At least he did come out and say it was about the money. Because anytime someone comes out and says it's not about the money, it's always about the money.
No, I think they're being honest about it, and I give them credit for that. I think they're absolutely being honest about it. It's about the money, also to compensate for a little bit of health concern here.
There is a health concern, and I don't want to minimize that. I'm actually going to transition very quickly to UFC. I thought UFC handled this situation very well. They had a positive test, and the fighter was removed. The 23 other fighters didn't test positive, and they went on with the event. And I thought the precedent that the UFC set was just because somebody tests positive, it doesn't mean we have to shut down the whole sport.
Well, you're right about that. And last week, Seth Everett was talking to us about what could happen if someone tests positive and are we finished? And I think the answer to that is, I don't think so, but I need to see each sport come up with a plan, right? Yeah. Like, what is baseball going to do? It's a little different, Seth, with UFC. Baseball, you're going to have 25 plus training staff, plus coaches, many more than that, sharing close quarters with each other, where a fighter doesn't really share close quarters with his 30 other fighters. So I think there's a team sport. There's a bigger concern at the end of the day. But UFC did show it's possible.
Well, we'll see. Figure it out. My whole deal, figure it out. It's a 5-month deal. Figure it out. We're going to bring in Rich Coutinho now, the 14-year beat reporter for the Mets on ESPN Radio New York. Rich, first and foremost, it's great to have you. And I just want to say before we get started, I was very sorry to hear about your father's passing.
Thank you. And so many people have reached out to me in the industry, and it's really incredible. Players, general managers, owners, colleagues in the press box. And as my dad always said, your life is evaluated on the people that are close to you and the people that inspire you. And so many of them came forth, including you guys. So I appreciate kind words.
We certainly wish you the best. We'll start with this. What will it take, from what you're hearing and your perspective, for the owners and players to get a deal done?
Well, they have to negotiate. I mean, I think both sides have some legitimate concerns. And I'll use the line from the movie Keanu Reeves and Al Pacino, Devil's Advocate, where they're on the roof and he says, "Are we negotiating?" And the answer Keanu Reeves gives him is always. And I think they have to come to the table and talk about what the needs are. My feeling on this whole thing is I side with the players more than the owners for two reasons. First of all, I think there are health concerns, and not only for the players, but for their families and when they go home to their families. And how about players whose wives are about to give birth? There are concerns. But there are also concerns on the field. You have your 6-foot distancing policy. Does that mean a first base coach has got to stand by the dugout? Does that mean you can't take a runner out on a slide on a double play? What is the catcher, batter, and umpire's closeness? How's that going to be maintained? These are all good questions that have to be answered, but I believe that the health concerns was all that was discussed in the first meeting. They didn't talk about money at all, but follow the money, because if you tell a player that they were going to get 50% based on a deal, and now they're going to get 33% of that 50% based on a revenue share. They're going to tell you get lost. And I think Major League Baseball has to be real careful, because the next court case that the baseball union loses will be the first one they lose. They are good at what they do. They're the best union in America. They're better than any other union around for the people that work for them. And I think the owners need to come to the table. And maybe one of the things they can negotiate out is what they did with the drafts. They said the drafts can only be 5 rounds. Maybe give and take a little on each side and bring the draft back to what it normally should be. Because I do think the owner, the union, does care about the players coming into baseball as well as the ones that are already in baseball. But I think some serious discussions have to be made, and I don't see this getting rectified within the next couple of weeks. And I think that really has to be done in order to get the season started in early July.
Rich, I think you have a really, really strong point too about the players' union. It's definitely the strongest in sports. It's the only uncapped league that's left, right? And if you look at the other sports, things have gone, I would say the players do lose in each negotiation through the years. Baseball has worked hard to not be capped and to have what they have. Let's say they figure out this money issue. Just this return to game play plan. We've heard that teams might be trying to play in their own ballparks, but let's be honest, New York is nowhere close to opening up. Neither is California. I think they bagged the whole summer at this point. Is the quarantine plan still in play? Florida is bringing back sports. Governor DeSantis said yesterday, sports are welcome. Arizona did as well. Sounds to me that has to be back in play.
It has to be, because I think in Florida and Arizona, you could just simply say the teams that train in Florida can play in their home field, and the teams that train in Arizona can play in the home field. And you could have 2 separate leagues, a Florida league and an Arizona league, and then playoff time, those teams could meet to see who's the best team in baseball. So I think it has to be in play. I don't think there's anything right now that they could turn their back on. But the problem I had with the whole thing was looking at teams playing in their own sites. What are you going to do with the Toronto Blue Jays? You can't have people going to Canada. Where are they going to play their games? I would assume Dunedin, Florida, where they train, but then that brings the whole Florida-Arizona thing back into focus. So definitely there are some big things that have to be decided. And then the other part of it is, I think if you tell the players we're going to pay you per diem per game, and maybe try something like this. I mentioned this on Twitter the other day. It looks like they want about an 80-game schedule. Some said 79, some said 82, whatever. But there's playoffs. So tack the playoff games on as if every player was going to play in every possible playoff game. Make that 80-game, stipend for the players. Make it about 102 games. And I think you could get players to come to the table and maybe agree to it if you also bring the draft back to where it was. I think those are points that could be negotiated. And it was really funny because I was talking to some of my bosses at ESPN, and when I told them that idea, and they said, Rich, you should be in that room negotiating this thing, because those are some good ideas. And I also think the TV ad revenue that would come in from games being played, if you want a full revenue share, is that going to be shared as well? Or is it just going to be the dollars that the teams can make by having games? That revenue share is a little confusing to me, because what revenue are they sharing? The other question I have about the owners is, do they have insurance against a season not being played? If so, is that part of the revenue also going to be shared? Somehow I doubt that, but there's a lot that hasn't been discussed that I'm sure Tony Clark and the union will get to the root of. And my whole thing in this whole thing is, when millionaires are having a debate with billionaires, I'm not too big on either side, but I'm certainly going to think more about the millionaires than the billionaires. And that's the way I think about these things. And I thought this way in 81 with the strike. And I think if you get a revenue share, the next step is a salary cap. And players don't want that. Major League Baseball wants it. The players don't. And I think if you move to a revenue share, it's going to become much harder to get an agreement when the CBA expires after next season.
Rich, that was actually my next question. So what's happening now? Do you see that in any way having any connective tissue to the negotiation that's coming up?
Absolutely. And anything that is earned by the owners, they're going to take that to that CBA and try to extend it. If the players, take a lower salary, then that's going to be brought into it. So I think this is almost a dress rehearsal for the CBA negotiations, and that's what makes this a very difficult thing to figure out on which way it's going to go.
We're joined by Rich Coutinho, the 98.7 ESPN New York Mets beat reporter since 2006. All right, on to the fun stuff, Rich. How did you get your first break covering the New York Mets?
Oh, it's a great story. I was out of school and couldn't get a job really. I was bartending, and a guy walked in and he started drinking like a fish and talking about the Mets, and he got pretty inebriated. So at the end of the night, I said, I'm going to call a car for you to take you home. And he said, oh, you know more about the Mets than anyone I've ever seen. Come to see me tomorrow. I'll get you a job. And he was the HR director of ABC Radio. And I said to myself, now, this guy was drunk last night, but I got to take a chance here. And I got the gig. I got a very entry-level job. I think I made more photocopies than anyone in the company for about the first 2 months of my tenure there. And I started covering games on a part-time basis, and then the guy covering the Mets left, and that's how I originally got the gig covering the Mets, and 84 was the first year I covered them. And the rest is history. And I think it proves that – and listen, I don't think I was any better than anyone else that wanted the job, but it was timing. It was being in the right place at the right time, taking advantage of your opportunities, and also maybe making screwdrivers that had a little more vodka in it than orange juice. That might have helped the process along as well.
What do you remember as an 8 or 9-year-old boy when it comes to the '69 Mets?
I was talking about this the other day because obviously SNY was repeating them. The morning of Game 1, my father took me for a haircut. Normal thing on a Saturday, he would take me for a haircut. I was 8 or 9 years old, and there's a whole bunch of Yankee fans in the in it. My father loved telling the story. He said, "You walked in and said, 'Is this a barbershop or a funeral parlor?' As an 8-year-old kid, I said that, and my father then surprised me, telling me that he secured tickets for games 3, 4, and 5 for me and him to go to in the '69 series. I said, "Well, Dad, I have school and they're day games," and he said, "I'll tell you, history teacher, this is the best history lesson you might ever have." And boy, was he right. And just saw so many games that year because we went to a lot of games in the regular season. I went to the Jimmy Qualls game, and the day before, the Mets scored 3 in the ninth off Ferguson Jenkins to beat the Cubs. And I saw Bob Moose no-hit the Mets in September in the middle of their run. Obviously saw them the night they clinched, which was actually fan appreciation night. And luckily for me, the game started a little earlier than it normally would. Because remember, in those days, games started at 8 o'clock. And this game actually started at 7. And I just remember the thing that's forgotten about that season more than anything else is the series with the Braves and the LCS. And I think Channel 9 had a fire, and a lot of that video is gone. But those games were incredible when you think that the Mets were built on pitching. And that was a great, great Brave lineup with future Hall of Famers like Hank Aaron and Orlando Cepeda in the lineup. And the Mets out-hit them. And that's how they beat them in that series. They out-hit them. They out-homered them. Seaver pitched game 1 and didn't pitch great. He gave up 5 runs, but the Mets won the game 9-5. They won, I think, the game 11-6, game 2. And then they won a 7-4 game in game 3 at Shea. And, that, looking back, that's an amazing thing that the Mets were able to beat the Braves at their own game when that wasn't considered to be the strength of the Met team. And then they play the Orioles, and that Orioles team was one of the best teams ever assembled. I mean, look at how many straight divisions they won in that era. And, in many ways, they were as big a dynasty type in the late 60s, early 70s as the Yankees were in the 90s. And the Mets beat that 69 team. And I'll never forget talking to Earl Weaver at a old timers day one time. I did an interview with him. And I said to him, what was the thing that surprised you most about the 69 series? And I'll clean this up a little bit by not putting the curse words in it. But he said, we all figured we'd have our hands full with Seaver and Koosman. But who was this Gary Gentry guy? And he just said, Gary Gentry, he says, for 3 months after that World Series, I had nightmares with his face right in my dreams. And when you look at an Oriole perspective, that was a team that won a whole host of games. And that Met team won 100 games, so it's not like they came in there in a substandard season. And they swept a team that had Hall of Famers in their lineup, a Hall of Famer pitcher in Phil Niekro as well. And then they beat Oriole team that had tons of Hall of Famers in that lineup, whether you look at Brooks Robinson, Frank Robinson, Jim Palmer, and what I call a lot of quasi all-stars and Hall of Famers in the Boog Powells of the world. So I think Davey Johnson as well. So, but I think one of the most amazing things, and I was thinking about this the other day when I was watching the 69 series, is Jerry Koosman threw the last pitch of the 69 series. And, you know, it was a fly ball by Davey Johnson, who, of course, would later manage the Mets. 17 years later, when the Mets won the World Series, the man that was traded for Jerry Koosman threw the last pitch in 86. Now, I got to think that's never happened in baseball history, where a guy gets the last out for his team in a World Series, and the next time they win a World Series, the guy he was traded for throws the last pitch of the World Series.
Rich, so tell us about, all through the years, favorite Met player to cover or watch. Who was it?
It'd have to be David Wright. David Wright was one of the most genuine people I've ever met. But I really liked dealing with Johan Santana. I really liked dealing with Jose Reyes. I really liked dealing with Beltran. And I got along very well with Carlos Delgado when a lot of other members of the media didn't. I enjoyed my time with Delgado. And one of the things that I always try to do when players of cultures that I'm not used to being around come around, I think it's my job as a reporter to get to learn about their culture a little bit, not the reverse. Player doesn't have to know my culture. I have to know their culture. And I really had a great time understanding the Hispanic culture and what a religion baseball is in those communities and how important it is to them, and sharing that with them. I got one funny story to tell you. There was one night where I'd met a girl and I wanted to take her out to a nice Hispanic place. And so I'm having the conversation with Jose Reyes, and the next day, Jose Reyes wrote out a bunch of Hispanic restaurants in Queens, and he said, mention my name, you'll get a good deal in there, taking her there. And I ended up going out with her for about a year or two, thanks to Jose Reyes. So I could thank him for that. But my point of the matter is that, like, to me, I'm a different kind of reporter, and Seth, I think you know this. If a player doesn't do well in the field, I'm going to be all over him. But it's never going to get about their personal life. And if people I work for want me to delve into players' personal lives, my answer is I'm not Rona Barrett. I'm a sports columnist, a sports reporter. I'll talk about the game. I'll be critical when I need to. But if you want me to talk about what a player's doing in his personal life, you better get someone else to do the job. And I think there's too much of that in our industry now. And I think that there'll be even more of it as the newspaper business continues to dwindle and dwindle and dwindle.
Rich Coutinho of ESPN New York. Rich, I want to dive back into that 86 team. There were so many variables. Doc and Darryl, the partying, 108 wins, great season. Obviously, what happened at the World Series against the Red Sox. We know all the main storylines, but from what you remember, what's something that fans may not recall that kind of flew under the radar that was important to the success of that team?
Well, I think when fans looked at that team from the outside and looked at the cliques that they envisioned, and I always used to laugh about this because people would say to me, how's Doc and Darryl? They must hang out all the time. Doc and Darryl were in totally different cliques in that clubhouse. And it's not like they didn't like each other, but the Keith Hernandez clique was different from the other side of the clubhouse that wasn't in the Keith Hernandez clique. And I think you got to remember, too, that these players lived in the 80s. And I can tell you from being a bartender in those years, people lived like they were dying tomorrow. And some of them were that I served drinks to. But my point on the whole thing is that these players were put into a position where the drugs and the alcohol and the women were all around. And it's easy to criticize. And I hear so many people say, oh, the Mets could have done more in that era. I totally disagree. First of all, I think people sometimes forget 2 years after the Mets won the World Series, they had a season where they won 100 games in 88. 100 games. So don't tell me they just went and hit away. Now, give the Dodgers credit for upsetting the Mets in the NLCS. They deserved it. But I think that team, if they had been in the era where the Yankees were in the 90s, where there's 3 divisions and 2 wild cards, how many World Series do you think the Mets might have gotten to? And that Cardinal-Met rivalry may have become like the Red Sox-Yankee rivalry was in the 90s. And it's all about timing. And I did a study where in the 80s, the Mets would have made the playoffs every year from 84 to 90, with the exception of 1989. And I conversely did something about the Yankees in the 90s where they probably would not have had a playoff spot because of the Indians until 98. So there would have been no 96. There would have been no Jeffrey Mayer. There would have been no 97, but there was. And timing is everything in life. But sometimes when people tell me the Mets didn't accomplish what they set out to do in that era, I think that's a bunch of utter nonsense. You build a team to win a championship. If that becomes a team that wins multiple championships, hey, that's great. But you build a team to win a championship. Frank Cashin did just that. And there are a lot of things that went on in that year. I remember sitting at a beach one summer when I found out that the Mets were supposed to have games 1 and 2 and 6 and 7 of the NLCS played at Shea, but because of a scheduling conflict in Houston, it got flipped. So that game 6 extra inning game in Houston, if the Mets had lost that game, they might have been screaming to themselves all winter, that game should have been at home if it wasn't for the scheduling conflict. So there are a lot of things that went on in that season that, listen, I traveled with them. I was in the hotel lobbies. One day there was a young lady that came up to me, and she was convinced I was Tim Tuffle's brother. Convinced. Okay? And listen, when you're a young 20-something guy, play along with it. And I think that for us to be critical of everything that team did or didn't do, and you live through the 80s, you got to look at what the 80s were and other businesses. And I'm telling you right now, I was a bartender in those years. And I'll tell you this, when I bartended in Limelight in those years, my best tips came between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. Because that's when most people were in the bathroom not serving customers, is all I'll say. And look, it was the way of the 80s, and the Mets were a part of that. But despite all that, they won a championship in a year in which I think that was the best postseason I've ever seen in baseball. Not only what the Mets did, but what the Red Sox did to the Angels and the comebacks and everything that we saw. I think that was one of the greatest postseasons I've ever been around.
Rich, who doesn't get enough credit? Backman had a tremendous series. Hernandez had a great series. Who doesn't get enough credit that should from that 86 World Series?
I think there's a couple of things I remember from that series. One is what Sid Fernandez did, in relief late in that series. That's something that sometimes gets lost in the shuffle. The other thing that I was thinking about with the 69 and the 86 Mets, another thing that just came to me when I was watching these games is both teams won World Series in which the day before that set up their possibility to clinch, there was a very unique play at first base. We all know the Buckner play, but in 69 was the J.C. Martin bunts. And then the following day, both teams went down 3-0 in the games they were playing and came back to win. That's just some stuff that, makes you think something upstairs was going on when all this was going on. And I think the thing about that 86 team that I remember also more than anything, guys like Dykstra. I mean, that was really the coming out party year for Lenny Dykstra. And Lenny Dykstra not only became a great postseason player that year, he later would be a great postseason player for the Phillies. And when you look at his postseason resume, it's pretty impressive. I also think that, defensively that team wasn't the best, but Gary Carter's defense behind the plate was off the charts. And overall, between offense and defense, the best catcher I've ever been around. And I was around Mike Piazza, but I think Carter's defense puts him ahead of Piazza in my mind as a Hall of Famer.
Why do you think Davey Johnson was the right guy to lead that team?
Players manager. I'm sure you guys all heard the story that when the Mets won the pennant, they trashed the plane, totally trashed it coming home. And the Mets executives gave Davey Johnson a bill, which he was going to have the players pay a fine for what they did on the plane. Right in front of management, Davey and the players, Davey Johnson tore that page up and threw it in the garbage, that invoice. A player's manager. Now, I think later in his career that kind of hurt him a little bit because he needed leadership and control, and it became players only, and it became kind of a free-for-all. And it really brought about his departure from the team. But that 86 team, Davey felt very simply, I don't care what you do off the field. I don't care if you hang from the top of the Empire State Building. But for 3 hours between the white lines, you better be ready to play, and you better play to win. And they did, and I think that made him the proper manager for that team, just like Bobby Valentine was the proper manager for the 2000 team. I think teams take on the presence of their manager. And when you look at that 86 team, they were brash. They would have fights. There were brawls on the field, not just the Red game. There were other games during the season. Tom Niedenfuhr getting, literally punched out by Ray Knight, There was David Palmer getting, thrown at Strawberry and him running to the mound. I often think that if some of those 86 players were in the 2000 dugout, Roger Clemens might have gotten what was coming to him. And I think looking back at the 2000 team, that's the one problem I have, that nobody really came to Piazza's defense, not so much in the World Series game because there's too much to lose, but there was so much time to do it, not only in the game where Clemens threw at Piazza's head, but in the game following it at Shea Stadium. And I felt like the Mets didn't do that. And if that was a 69 team, they would have. And all you got to do is point to even the 69 team with Jerry Koosman. Tommy Agee was thrown out by Bill Hands, and the next inning, Jerry Koosman said, I'm going to give Ron Santo a sore wrist. I'm going to throw right at him. And I didn't see that a lot from the 2000 team, but certainly the 69 and 86 team had that culture.
There's a really interesting, you bring up the Piazza Clemens. There's a great thread on this that I saw on Twitter the other day that catalogs all the Piazza Clemens moments from 2000 to 2002. It took Sean Estes to throw at Clemens, and he missed. Sean Estes, no one else stepped up, but Sean Estes on the 2002 Mets. So that tells you all you need to know. So good point on you there for bringing that up.
Well, one of the things, though, is Torrey wouldn't play him at Shea Stadium. So unlike National League pitchers, he never had to come to the plate to hit if he only pitched against him at Yankee Stadium. Then finally Torrey relented, and I feel bad for Sean Estes because he wasn't on that 2000 team, and he had to bear the brunt. But I think the thing people forget about that game is Piazza, of course, hit a homer off Clemens, as he always does. And Sean Estes hit a home run that day as well.
He did, yeah.
For the Mets.
I give Estes a ton of credit for stepping up.
Yeah. And, I talked to Piazza after the game, and I said, do you feel you have closure now a little bit? And he said, Rich, closure, I don't even know what that means. And I think that, really funny story. I had a book came out a couple of years ago called Press Box Revolution, where I talked about the evolution of the sport. But I also had 2 chapters in there that Piazza was in a lot, one about 9/11 and then one about Piazza Clemens. Well, Mike sees me in spring training last year, and he says, Rich, I heard you wrote a book. I heard I'm in it. I said, yeah. I said, there's one chapter about 9/11, and there's a chapter in there about that punk, Roger Clemens. He started laughing. He goes, you got to get me a copy of the book. So the next day, I brought a copy of the book to the clubhouse. And he goes, well, Rich, you got to sign it. I go, now, wait a minute. You're Mike Piazza. Me signing something for you, that doesn't really seem too right. He goes, no, I want you to. He goes, because there's one thing I'm pretty sure of, Rich. I'm pretty sure if you were on my team, you would have charged the man and taken on Roger Clemens, which I thought was a really funny comment from Mike Piazza.
Rich, that 2000 series, Yankees fans like to gloat that they won it 4-1, but that series was incredibly close. No game was decided by 2 or more, no more than 2 runs. I mean, what in your mind would have changed the tone of that series? How could it have gone the other way?
If the Mets had won game 1, you're looking at a different series, because even if you just take Roger Clemens having to take the mound with all that drama down a game to none, totally different situation for Roger Clemens. Benitez couldn't get out of that inning. He actually got out of the inning. At least he didn't give up the lead. But I think what people forget about that game is Glendon Rush got out of a bases-loaded, none-out situation and then almost did again before Vizcaino got the hit to win the game. But that game one was a killer, much like game one was a killer for the Mets in the 2015 World Series.
I want to fast forward to Willie just a bit. 07, that heartbreaking collapse. Willie gets let go middle of the following year. 07, was that a big part of the reason why Willie Randolph never really, although he did get an interview with the Brewers, but he never got another manager's job? Why do you think that was?
I think people looked at the collapse and blamed Willie for it. And I think when you collapse like that, it's a team blame. It's not individual blame. I think the media was so harsh on Willie Randolph that whole season. And I think that, one of the things that if you're going to look at the bad of Willie Randolph, then he also is the manager that was on the team that ended the Braves division run. You don't ever hear anyone say that about Willie Randolph. And it's true. It's there for everyone to see. Not only did he end it, but he made a mockery of the NL East that year. I don't think the Mets have had a manager run a bullpen as well as Willie Randolph did since Willie Randolph left. Any manager they've had. So I think that there's a lot of good that he brought to the team. I also think, though, that the media was pretty unfair with Willie. And I got a funny story to tell you about Willie. We're all in the dugout one day, and Willie had a great sense of humor as a player, but we didn't see it too much as a manager. Great guy. And he's trying to look at each of us and say what actor that we remind him of. So he comes to me and he's like, I said, Willie, I get so sick of this Tom Cruise stuff. I hear it all the time. I don't want to hear it anymore. And Willie goes, Rich, if you're Tom Cruise, then I'm Denzel. And from that moment on, Willie and I got along great, still do to this day. And I learned a lot about, life and managing from being around him. And Tony Bernazard was the guy that greased the skids for Willie too. And I remember being with Willie at an old-timers game at Yankee Stadium, and I pulled him aside and I said, does the Tony Bernazard thing ever bother you? He goes, you were around, Rich. You know better than me. And I said, yeah, and I have a theory. Tony Bernazard was at best a journeyman second baseman. You were an all-star second baseman, but he had control in the organization, and he was going to make you pay for that. And Willie looked at me and he said, that may be the best explanation I've ever heard about what happened with Tony. Mm-hmm. And it's true. And I don't fault Tony as much as I fault the people who empowered him. And I think that, it was proven when Tony left that he was a detriment to the organization. And Willie Randolph got the Mets within an eyelash of the World Series. He was a big reason why David Wright progressed as much as he did. He handled the bullpen well. He had to deal with a lot of millionaires in that clubhouse, whether it was Pedro, whether it was, Beltran. He entered the playoffs losing two of his starting pitchers. One on the eve, he lost El Duque on the eve of the playoffs, yet still swept the Dodgers and got the Mets to a Game 7. And I think if I was going to grade Willie Randolph on his managing job in the Mets, I have to give him take something away for the collapse, but no less than a B is my grade for Willie Randolph as Met manager.
Jason?
Yeah, Seth, just on a tangent, Willie had collapse and all, doesn't get another opportunity, which I find just unbelievable. Maybe there's something we don't know. Joe Torre did not have a good run with the Mets. Yankees hire him, and there's so many managers that had failed in their first opportunity that got a second or third, or more retreads, right, that haven't won anything. And the fact Willie has not gotten another choice to me is just unbelievable. Anyway, Seth, I said what I need.
I think part of that, guys, is Willie's not into the whole sabermetric thing as much as other managers are. And listen, sabermetrics, I'll use a line from Seinfeld, war, what is it good for? Absolutely nothing. And my point on all that is sabermetrics and stats are great tools. We all have a woodshed in our house. There's a rake in there. Rake is a great tool. It helps you with a lot of things, but you're not going to necessarily use it to sweep up your living room carpet. Okay? And my point is that sometimes managers have to go on hunches. But today's managers don't like hunches, because if something goes wrong, they could come in the post-game presser and say, well, the numbers dictated that was the move to make. Well, I got news for you. A lot of managers have won World Series based on hunches. We saw Joe Torre do it a lot with the Yankees. We saw Gil Hodges do it with the Mets. We saw, Yogi Berra do it with the Mets in '73. We've seen it time and time again. Stats are good tools to use, but if it makes us close our eyes to watch a player and how they react to pressure situations and how tired they are or how to manage them as people, then stats can ruin your team, not help your team. And I think Willie understands that because he learned it from Joe Torre. And I think that if you're not a stat hound, it's very hard for you to get multiple managerial jobs in baseball today. And Willie deserves another job. Willie had a great story one time. Because I saw him when he left the Mets. I think he became bench coach for the Brewers. And he told me a funny story. He said the manager of the Brewers, was running out there every day with two people into the middle of one of the, fields in spring training. And Willie goes up to him and says, I think it was Ken Maka was the manager. He says, who are those guys you're going out with them, going out to the middle of the field, in suits every day? He goes, that's the entire media. And Willie just started laughing because that's not New York. And in New York, you also have the media contingent to it. And I do think that in those days with the Mets, there was a lot of the media handling it badly. The whole Los Mets thing was, and I'm going to tell you guys the truth. Sometimes we were waiting for Omar Minaya to talk, and a member of the beat might start making fun of his Spanish accent before he came into the media scrum. And I found that disgusting, okay? And I think the fact that the Mets had a Hispanic GM and an African-American manager didn't sit all too well with some members of what I'll call the lily white media. And I think I saw that with my own two eyes, and it disgusted me. It really did.
Very well said, Rich. The 15 World Series, the two games that stand out for me, Game 1 and Game 4, both games the Mets could have won. That 15 team, what do you think it would have taken in that series for the Mets to beat the Royals?
Well, give the Royals a lot of credit. They were a team that knew how to win. They had guys that fundamentally were sound, but I thought everyone says they think the series turned in Game 1. I don't agree with that. I think the series turned in Game 4. And I think the reason I think it turned was when the Mets went to the bullpen, Tyler Clippard came in, and you can't walk back-to-back guys. You just can't with a lead. That was a game the Mets should have salted away. And even if they had lost Game 5, they would have had two of their best pitchers going in Game 6 and 7 in Kansas City, and who knows. To me, Game 1 you can live with if you get Game 4. But the fact that you lost both 1 and 4 in the same way with the bullpen, I think it puts it on the bullpen. I know there was an error in there, and I know Familia got some blown saves. One of them, he came in with a runner on third and less than 2 outs. Unless he did a Houdini act, he wasn't going to get a save in that game. But my point of the thing was the bullpen. It's really funny because I saw an article written this week on how Michael Conforto hasn't shown yet that he could be a great player. Well, all I needed to see in that rookie year of Conforto was what I saw in the World Series, a game where he hits 2 home runs in a World Series game. Conforto reminds me so much of David Wright in the way he goes about his work and the way he goes about his at-bats and the way he's a great teammate. And I think this Met team may lack some talent, but they have great chemistry because guys like McNeil, Alonso, and Conforto and DeGrom are great teammates. And I think that gave them a lot of impetus in the second half. And look, the Mets got back in the wild card race. They had that great game with the Nationals where Frazier hit the 3-run homer, but they just didn't have enough in the bullpen to keep it going through September, and they didn't make a wild card spot. But the fact that they got back in it was because of the chemistry they had in that clubhouse, and I think that Conforto was a big part of that. And I think when people talk about leaders in their clubhouse, they very rarely talk about Conforto. But I can tell you, being around that team, Conforto is a huge leader in that clubhouse. And I think we'll start to see that more and more as the years progress.
So we know about the ownership situation, the deal with Steve Cohen falling through, and now A-Rod and J-Lo, they're not going to be able to get it done. What do you see happening with the ownership situation?
Well, I think, Seth, you and I should go to the bank and see if we can get a loan and buy the team. But
I'm just trying to buy a townhouse.
I think that, one of the things that has to happen is I think whoever buys this team is going to want to also buy SNY. And if the Mets extract that from the deal, it's going to be very hard for them to sell the team. When you look at around the country what these regional networks are now being sold for, ESPN had to deal with Fox, and they had to sell the sports channels. They sold it to Sinclair Broadcast for a tremendous amount of money, because now there are 3 revenue streams with these sports networks. You got your on-air linear channel, you got your streaming rights, and then you got this whole gambling thing that's kind of underneath everything, where you might have a whole third stream of revenue saying, okay, do you think the next pitch is going to be a double? Bet on it, and that bet is sponsored by blah blah blah. I'm telling you, it's a third revenue stream that's coming in, and Cohen knew this. Cohen is a smart guy. He's a great money manager, and he knew that was a big part of it. And I think the problem with the Cohen deal, and there was a lot of problems with it, but I don't even know if he would have been approved by Major League Baseball. That's a whole other issue for a whole other day.
Right.
But I do think that if the Mets weren't going to give him SNY, and I think he was willing to wait even longer to have control of the team, but he wanted SNY control right away. And I think that's what made the deal go away. And if the Mets are going to make SNY not part of a deal, or a longer wait than even for control of the team, they're going to have a hard time selling the team. Because I'm telling you right now, if I was buying a baseball team and they owned a regional sports network, I'd have to also get the regional sports network. I'd have to have it for a lot of reasons. One reason is you don't then have to pay the money to a team for their rights. You already have it. 2 is the whole ad sales component. And 3 is the affiliate sales component to it. And Seth, this is the world I live in, so I know a little bit about it. And I think that if the Mets just try to sell the team only and not SNY, they're going to have a hard time selling the team.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, the team not getting the sale done pre-pandemic has hurt tens of millions of dollars, perhaps. But the regional network still has. The network will keep its value. It's going to happen. So I'm going to predict Cohen gets this done, come hell or high water eventually. So let's revisit this in like 6 months.
Well, and I agree with you, but I think, and I hate to bring up his name because I know people don't like him, but Jim Dolan's always wanted a baseball team.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you can talk about Jim Dolan as an owner and say he doesn't do this, he doesn't do that, but you could never say he doesn't spend money on his team.
Correct.
Now, maybe he may spend it in the wrong way. Maybe he may hire the wrong managers to decide how to spend the money. But the concept of spending money, Jim Dolan has that chromosome that Met fans want. He likes spending money. And listen, everyone blames Jim Dolan for what's going on in the Garden. The Rangers are run much better than the Knicks are in terms of getting the athlete they want free agency. Jim Dolan commands both those things. So it can't be just Jim Dolan. It has to be some of the people that the Knicks have put in place over the years to make those decisions. But I wouldn't count Jim Dolan out because I know I worked for him for 8 years when I worked with the AMC networks. And he's always told me he wanted a baseball team. So I wouldn't count him out of this mix either.
It's a good point by Rich. I mean, listen, the Mets fans could do worse than Jim Dolan. Again, basketball Jim Dolan, not successful. Hockey Jim Dolan, very good hockey owner. So if he stays out of the minutia and hires the right baseball guys, not the worst option.
Rich, I want to ask you
Absolutely.
The perception. You mentioned we talked about perception before. A couple of more questions. I know you've been very generous with your time, but in terms of perception, Wilpons, the way they get beat up in New York, fair or unfair?
I think it's a little unfair. I can tell you from things that have happened to me in my personal life that Jeff and Fred Wilpon have been so kind and generous in steering me in the right direction. I think a lot of you know that I had chemotherapy that I had to have last year, and I was pointed in the right direction by the organization. So, I don't want to sit here and say he's the most altruistic man I've ever met, but I think if the Wilpons announced tomorrow that they had developed a cure for AIDS, the media's reaction would be, what took them so long?
Yeah.
And I think that it's somewhat unfair. The New York Yankees had a decade, this past decade, that they didn't win a World Series. They didn't get to a World Series. And that hadn't happened to them in a century, 100 years. It all happened in a year where the Mets did get to the World Series and the Red Sox made a mockery of the Yankee-Red Sox rivalry. And my point is, do you read anything about it? I'll give you another one. The Mets made a huge deal with Cespedes to get him to give money back and also have an idea of, an incentive plan where he can get some of the money back. They had to work with the Players Association with that. I'm sure Brody Van Wagenen's experience as an agent helped a lot with that. But the Yankees have a similar situation with Jacoby Ellsbury, that they're still paying him, and it's kind of the same situation. He did something he shouldn't have done. He went to a doctor to get another procedure done. So my point of the whole thing is, let's reverse it. Let's say the Yankees worked out something with Ellsbury, and let's say the Mets were still in the Cespedes fire drill. What do you think people would be writing? They'd be writing, why can't the Mets, get a deal like the Yankees did with Ellsbury? Yet you don't hear anyone saying that now, that the Cespedes deal is in and the Ellsbury deal is up. So I do think there's some unfairness on how the Wilpons are covered in this town. And I think that, listen, I gave them a lot of criticism on the way they fired Willie Randolph. That was one of the worst things I've ever seen done to any person in any organization. But I can't fault the Mets by this decade. They went and got Sandy Alderson, and Sandy Alderson did what he had to do to win a National League championship. And I think that they've put together a team now that has a lot of talent, and we'll see what happens with a new manager, a guy that's never managed on the major league level before. But I think that the media tends to think that everything will always go wrong with the Mets. And I don't know how you can think that when just a few short years ago, the Mets won the national championship. So I do think there's a lot of unfair coverage of the Wilpons, yes.
On that note, Rich, last one for me, in your dealings with him so far, what strikes you about Luis Rojas?
Interesting guy. I think the best thing I could say about him is he's a great listener. And I think that's an important skill that a manager has to have. Me and him had a joke on his press conference because he was saying why he had the number on his back. And he said, well, it's my birthday, September 1st. And I looked at him and I said, you're kidding me, Louis. And I'll take my driver's license out to show you. But me and you share the same birthday. And every time he talks to me on the phone, he'll say, oh, we got a plan to do something on September 1st. It's both our birthday. Now, I mentioned to him in passing, and he remembers that. I think he has a lot of confidence with dealing with players and having to tell them the truth when the truth could hurt. And I think he's going to get that aspect of it well. Now, the X's and O's of managing, that's one thing that we're not going to know until he actually goes and does it. But communication-wise, he's one of the most effective communicators I've been around in the sport in a long time.
Rich, we took a little more time than we planned, but you're an encyclopedia of Mets knowledge, and we really enjoyed taking a trip down memory lane and getting your insights. Good use of our time, and hopefully we can have you back on here soon.
Absolutely. And Seth, let me say, your show's a great show. And more importantly, when I think of you, Seth, I think of the word genuine. And there aren't too many genuine people in our industry, but if there was a genuine sports encyclopedia, your picture would be right next to the word. So thanks for having me on the show.
Thank you, Rich. I don't know where you find the time. We'll have to have a cup of coffee and talk about time management because I know you've got it down to an absolute science with all the things you do. Thank you so much again, and be safe.
Stay well, my friends, and to all your listeners, stay safe and healthy.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rich. Rich Coutinho of 98.7 ESPN New York, Jason.
At the end, the Mets managerial situation, I think at the end of the day, they might benefit from what happened. I don't think Beltran was the right guy to start with really no bench experience leading a team. So I think this might work out in their favor. Time will tell. But I know Mets fans probably aren't they're over it, and I think they're looking up at this one.
That's it. So moving right along, Diamond Dan joins us from Hamilton, Massachusetts. Welcome.
Oh, once again, I have to follow another great guest here. But what are we here to talk about, boys?
And you're like the cleanup hitter. We put the men on base, and then you come in and just smash it home.
No, not today. For our Mets fan friends and listening, that was fascinating stuff. I was wrapped and didn't know how I was going to follow this. But what are we going to talk about, my boys? What are we going to talk about?
Well, let's start. Let's do our customary headwear check. We're going to talk about what's on your head in a minute. Gambling segment is on with NASCAR's return Sunday. So a good choice of headwear. By the way, that Yankees, what is this? Is that like a windbreaker? What do you got?
Yeah, like the little half zip kind of thing.
Just getting warmed up spring training shirt. We've been getting just warmed up since February.
Did you go to Tampa this year?
No, I bought this at like 75% off last week.
It's
Dan,
true.
that windbreaker you're wearing, was that part of a late night Fanatics binge?
It may have been. I don't know, but it wasn't a coronavirus related.
Corona spending. Hashtag Corona spending.
Let me tell you something, because you guys know what I go through when it comes to buying things online, especially during this pandemic. I went crazy buying hats. It started out, I love the 47 brand hats. They're not an advertiser, so this is a genuine plug. And I believe, listen, I'm a Yankee fan, but I believe in the classics, right? So the Brooklyn Dodgers, love that cap. Got a Brooklyn Dodgers cap. Got a New York Giants cap, even though the Mets logo comes from the New York Giants. And then after that, I got to tell you, I went nuts. I probably sat on my phone for about 2 hours saying to myself, should I do it? Should I not do it? I went and bought 7 more hats. 7.
One for every day of the week, Seth. That's
A Chicago White Sox hat with the old Sox logo.
Love
Padres, Royals, Kansas City Scouts, the NHL team that didn't make it very far.
If there's a time to do it while you're healthy and God bless everybody's healthy, Yahweh, whatever you guys, it's like this is the time to do it because here we are. We're in a scenario where what are we spending money on right now? Our health and our well-being, that of our kids, that of our dogs, whatever,
Listen, when you have Corona hair, you got to get the hats and make sure you take care of it. Right?
Is that a problem? Is that a problem for you, Jason?
It's not for me, but we've gotten reports from Seth through the last week that the Corona hair situation is out of control.
Oh,
yeah, there you go, buddy.
Hey, better to have it than not.
Now, you know what? Are you sure? I don't know. Right
I
now,
was on the verge. I was on the verge of going to CVS and getting clippers the other day, and then I took a picture and I sent it to you. I have my Jackalope Brewing cap. It's a trucker cap. We all went to the Jackalope Brewery in Nashville, Tennessee. And it's like one of those box hats that Kyle Shanahan wore in the Super Bowl, which I know Dan absolutely loves.
Love it. Don't like it.
I had the Chris Christopherson hair sticking out of the sides of my cap. And Jason texted me and said, do not cut that anytime soon.
Yeah. It's the Phil Mickelson look when he was coming back from being fat. He had it. He had his swing going. He had the driver in the bag. And he was still nailing 3 woods and 5 woods for 300 yards. That's the look you want. That Phil Mickelson almost comeback look is always good.
So speaking of live sports, Phil and Tiger are coming up. But before that, Dan, we have NASCAR at Darlington on Sunday, another live sport.
Well, can we back up for 1 second to what Rich was talking about a little bit, and that there is there's a new, before the plague started and, before we're in this situation here, gambling was becoming a mainstream part of sports for everyone, for those who casually watched, for, for money and for those who watch sports religiously, but think, all right, we're going to put on another layer for it. And that became very attractive, and states were beginning to accept sports gambling through, internet apps and phone apps very responsibly in a way, right? So it's interesting to hear Rich talk about, when now moving forward, especially in a post-COVID world, you package up networks, we get that part, right? And, if the team owns a television network, that's part of it. But now you're talking about a secondary gambling opportunity, and, love them or leave them, Barstool Sports aligning with Penn National, and other, sports networks aligning with gambling organizations is going to be part of the future, I think. And people are looking for that now, especially. I mean, there's a reason why, we're going to talk about NASCAR in a second here and getting back to live racing. God bless America in the great state of South Carolina. But, there's a reason why horse racing followed every iRace on Sundays over the last, 2.5 months.
So we dive into Darlington, Dan. What are you looking for?
Well, we're going from ponies, as I just said, to horsepower. So let's go. There are other sports across the world that are starting this weekend. The Bundesliga in Germany is beginning this weekend again. So if you really got to scratch your, third-party sports itch, there's opportunities to bet on soccer, live soccer from Europe. The Premier League.
Don't bet on Dynamo Dresden, though. They're quarantined for 14 days.
Are they really? Oh, well.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm my information is late from the wire.
They're in Bundesliga 2.
Oh well, we're talking about Bundesliga 1. The people that weak American soccer fans like me appreciate. And you're going to get the English Premier League comes back on June 1st. But let's talk about the great American sport, NASCAR. The National Association of Stock Car Auto Racing, right?
Yes.
So this will be the first race since Phoenix back on March 8th, and we're going to Darlington, South Carolina, scene of the greatest and closest finish in NASCAR history between Ricky Craven and Kurt Busch back in 2003. If you can picture a Tide car and a Rubbermaid car as close as you can in NASCAR. And that was
that's one of my favorite finishes ever. Darlington historically provides great racing. That finish was outstanding. Door to door, cross the finish line, smoke, sparks, the whole 9 yards. Love it.
Oh yeah, and hopefully, I think NASCAR is looking. All right, so first American sport to come back. No fans, of course, in South Carolina, just like the cornhole extravaganza that was on ESPN last weekend. No fans. This will be, there are storylines here, though, gentlemen. There are storylines. And the first is that Ryan Newman will be in the seat of his car since his very death-defying, scary wreck at the Daytona 500, which occurred back on February 16th. So Ryan Newman, as everybody knows, was in a very, dangerous-looking and terrible wreck on the last lap of the Daytona 500. He's back in the seat, and he's, there was talk about who was going to come back and fill his car, and he will race on Sunday. The second storyline is that Matt Kenseth, retired, former NASCAR. Was that a Winston Cup or a Sprint Cup champion? Winston Cup champion in the old, what was it, the DeWalt car, number 17.
Car for Roush.
Is coming back to sit in the 42 following some not so excellent internet comments from Kyle Larson.
So since you mentioned Kyle Larson, looking at driver averages, just on driver averages, because that's something I look at to determine favorites for the race. Kyle Larson really screwed himself here. He was at third best average of active drivers behind Eric Jones and Kyle Busch. And the last two Darlington races, he was third and second. So bye-bye, Kyle Larson. You screwed yourself here.
That was actually a question of mine. Sorry to cut you off there. I wanted to know, and you kind of answered, who's got a track record at Darlington that can positively or negatively impact their performance?
Oh, let me fill you in because the fastest race ever run at Darlington Raceway was run by none other than Kyle Larson's replacement, Matt Kenseth, at 3 hours and 32 minutes. So he and I think an average speed of 141 miles an hour. So Matt Kenseth holds the fastest race at Darlington, and it just so happens that he's coming back this weekend to sit in that seat.
He does, and he's at an 11.9 average finish in Darlington in his career.
Well, there you have it. See, someone did better research than me, apparently.
I'm tabbing. I got it up on my screen.
For those
I'm not that advanced. I wrote it down.
For those wondering, the reason why I'm drinking Coca-Cola in this segment and asking questions is because I'm genuinely interested in learning about NASCAR. And with nothing else being on TV right now, this is my time to really get a grasp on it.
Coca-Cola is one of the sponsors on the 42 car.
Well, see, it's like the Illuminati is all coming around. Kyle Larson.
And I didn't have to take
tell you that,
either.
For what it's worth, I mean, what is America like? What do America? I mean, men more than women, sure, but like, what does America need right now? Right? They need something to rally behind. And if we went back and looked at what happened in the interim time between mid-March and now, I will say NASCAR filled the void with their iRacing series. So a lot of what iRacing dictates, and that was going on. There were folks that ran in the call it the AAA and AA versions of NASCAR, ran in the iRacing. But there are some interesting points of the 40 cars that are entered for this Sunday's race in the great state of South Carolina. Yeah, and the first is that, Denny Hamlin won the last iRace and also won the Daytona 500. And here we go again. I've been interrupted once again by the birthday boy here from last week. You should be in bed.
We finished my favorite book, Jedi Academy.
Who's your favorite?
Get to sleep.
Here, who's your favorite NASCAR driver?
Chase Elliott, baby.
That's great.
It's 9:06. Why aren't you in bed?
My mom.
How does it feel to be 6 years old now? That's a big milestone.
Yep.
Wait, here.
What?
Did you like iRacing?
Yeah, I like that racing.
So now that you've been 6 years old for a couple of days, what words of wisdom do you have to 5-year-olds and 4-year-olds about getting through the wars?
A bunch of different ones.
What's the best advice you can give a 4 or 5-year-old about surviving those tough years?
I don't know.
All right, think about it and get back to me next week. How about that?
I'll see you
Okay.
next week.
Wait. Who's
Andrew
going to win the
Strauss.
real race on Sunday?
Jimmy Dunson.
All right. That's fantastic.
All right, you
Bye
go.
bye.
See it? He just said that to keep Uncle Jason happy. That's what it was.
Well, interestingly, Jimmy Johnson, while he does have one win at Darlington, his numbers are not good. And in the last 4 races, 33rd, 12th, 39th, and 16th.
But he's given like 3,300 this weekend, so it might be a consideration. I don't
It
know.
is a consideration at 3,300, yeah.
All right, so can we go back? Sorry about that.
Yes, moving right along.
This is don't have kids, folks. I didn't say I love my children, and they're experts at that. They love NASCAR. What can I say?
Of course.
So and they're great Americans. So here we go. We're going. If we go back to iRacing, right? So Hendrick Motorsports, which is one of the teams, Jimmy Johnson, Chase Elliott, Alex Bowman, and who's the last one there? Jason?
William Byron.
Your favorite, all right, and 24, replacing Jeff Gordon.
iRacing champion, William Byron.
Yeah, well, so he won 3 of the 6 races he entered into in iRacing. So that's something to keep in mind in the back of your mind coming into real live racing this weekend. But if we look at the track, right, it's going to be 90 degrees and partly cloudy in South Carolina. 90 degrees. Can you believe that? Again, living in Massachusetts, I can't even fathom 90 degrees right now. but it's going to be a hot track that's very consistent with summer and good racing conditions for the 1.3 mile track this weekend. We got 25-degree banks all 4 turns. So let's talk records, shall we? We already talked about Matt Kenseth. This is a trivia question for Jason. Who has the most top 10s at Darlington ever?
Ever? Is he an active driver?
Ever. No. You've met him, though.
Jeff. I didn't mean Jeff Gore. Bill Elliott.
There you go. Bill Elliott has 35 top 10s.
Elliott, when we met him when he was lost looking for his son.
Right. That's right. And Eric Jones is the defending champion going into this weekend.
Anybody seen Chase?
Yeah. Eric Almirola has the fastest qualifying lap at 26 seconds with 184 miles an hour going into this weekend. But if we're going to talk about some lines, you want to talk about lines? Are we talking about
lines? Let's go.
Lines.
All right. We're talking about racing lines. Here we go. It's about time, man. I'm rusty. I don't know. You got, sometimes you come out of the bullpen, you're not quite ready, but I'm ready. This is all based off the DraftKings Sportsbook and Casino that is available in the great state of New Jersey and the great state of New Hampshire. And who, in your estimate, Jason, would be leading for the win at plus 500 and plus 600, respectively?
I'm going to go with a Kyle Busch, Kevin Harvick.
That is correct. So Kyle Busch is giving 500 points for the W this weekend, and Harvick 600 for the checkers as well.
For the break, Kyle Busch was not running his normal dominant self. The team did not look well. So we'll see how they come off the break.
And here we are. We're coming into a fresh season. No fans. It's going to be teams, officials, and that's about it, right? So we're talking, when I gamble, when we wager, right, what do we want? We want value. We want
give me some value. I need to make some money. I can't be betting on the favorites.
Bang for your buck, right? You want to make a long shot. And I will say that this is all for informational purposes only and entertainment for our viewers.
Make me some money, Dan. What do you got?
All right. Well, for the win, I like William Byron, who did a nice job at plus 2,500. So every $100 you bet, you win $2,500. That is. And I will say that, Matt Kenseth given 2,800 on this race might be an interesting bet. But my locks here are Chase Elliott at plus 1,000 and Brad Keselowski at plus 900. I like
them both. I actually like them both a lot.
Alex Bowman plus 1,500. Not a terrible wager. I will also state that at least with DraftKings, my preferred app that I use because I can drive to New Hampshire from where I live. Parlaying is a no-no on a singular race, so that's tough. And we talked earlier about storylines. For the win, Ryan Newman is giving plus 10,000.
Wow, I can't do Newman. I can't do Newman. And I like Matt Kenseth. He's a pro's pro and a champion. But here's the problem for this week. There's no qualifying and there's no practice. The drivers literally have to go from their motor coaches to the car and run a race. And he doesn't have any seat time with that team, has never worked with that team. Quite honestly, that takes some time. He should run a respectable race, but I can't put money on Kenseth. I should have asked you what Logano was at because his Darlington numbers are not good, but his team has been very strong over the last year and a half.
As the late great Warner Wolf would say, let's go to the videotape. Denny who are we looking at? Logano. He's a plus 850 winner, plus 260 top 3, and minus 215 top 10. So I don't like the top 10 bets, but there's some value.
I like the win. I like the win for Logano. I like the win.
It's an interesting bet, but I like the value also. In my value pick for this weekend is a top 5 pick for Eric Almirola at plus 750. Take it to the bank.
Yeah. We'll review these next week. I'm taking Logano for the win as my pick.
Diamond Dan, Matt Soriano wants to know if you have pickleball odds.
I don't know. We talked about pickleball, NASCAR. I mean, Matt, come on, man. I mean, you're gonna watch the race on Sunday. You know why? Because there's nothing else on TV.
There's monster ratings.
They are gonna. The thing was let's go back to when iRacing became a thing on television, right? It was a ratings machine. They got 1.3 million viewers the first weekend, 1.7, 1.8, 1.9. They went over 2 million viewers on their fourth race, I think. It was because there's nothing else out there. And again, I don't mean to be sexist by any means, but when American men sit down on a Sunday and have a beer before they cook dinner for their kids, what do they want to watch? They want to watch live sports. And like I said a couple weeks ago, I mowed the lawn a couple weeks ago, and what did I wanted to catch the tail end of a ball game when I went back inside because the windows were open.
I got one better for you. On Sunday, it's going to do good ratings. People on a Sunday, I don't know, every day's a Sunday right now. I actually think next Wednesday night, the first weeknight primetime NASCAR race in our memory, our history, is going to do even better. They're going to hit on something there. Watch that. That's going to be big.
I mean, look, if people are watching fucking Disney sing-alongs, they're going to watch NASCAR races.
I can't take it.
Before we go further, I'd like to shout out Guy Fieri with your favorite story. Good job.
Dan, how much was that?
It was $40, but all proceeds go to Restaurant Relief America. Okay, for all of your, every restaurant that you're soliciting right now for takeout, for delivery, those people, they're essential workers and they're doing their thing. And Guy Fieri in his giant fucking house in Southern California, he understands. So I mean, I bought an igloo cooler Flavor Town right here.
That thing is absolutely amazing.
It is amazing. You know what? And it's got also, another shameless plug. Our Jason and I, hang on, there we go. Jason and I went to, what was it called? Other Half Brewing in Brooklyn, New York, in the great state of New York, in the Empire State. And the guys there that run that joint, which, Jason, how many people were there the day we went there back?
About 40,000. They're never going to get social distancing in that place. It was wild.
And you think hipsters invented social distancing, so they would have been that. However, so the guys at Other Half came up with a recipe for beer. So I'm just saying this: if wherever you live you see an all-together beer, right, brewed by a local brewery in your neighborhood or in your region, go buy it, because that money goes to support breweries and restaurant workers and those essential employees right now who need it the most.
Well said.
I love that. Thank you.
Well said.
So
all right.
Now I'm going to shout out Bentwater Brewing in Lynn, Massachusetts, because they are another one, Channel Marker right here in Beverly, Massachusetts. They took on they got the recipe and they decided to make this beer, and they're supporting their local communities. So we should be doing the same by soliciting their product.
I'll tell you this: I've been eating more out in the last week or so, and eating terrible, like dietary wise, but I'm just justifying it that I'm putting money back into workers. That's it. Like I ordered Chinese this tonight before the show, and holy God, like I can't. I am. It's out of control. But I gave money to a local business, so yeah.
What's their definition of Chinese food in Texas? Like a combination.
But I want to say it's I actually
egg noodles and ketchup.
No,
I was going to ask if it was like fried chicken wings and fried rice.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with the chicken wings at the Chinese place ever. Hey, Seth, were you going to go to Start Bench Cut next?
Yes.
All right.
Can we wait? Let's get a pick from me and get a pick from Jason real quick for this weekend. Did you already pick? Who did you pick?
I'm going Logano for the win on this one.
All right, I'm doing Chase Elliott at plus 1,000 for this weekend for the win. And I would take Amarola at plus 750 for a top 5.
I don't know what you got for odds. For top 5, I'll take the Bowman. I'll take Bowman for top 5.
Bowman's given 1,500, so that's a pretty good bet. I love that bet.
I'm going to go Bowman for top 5.
No, that's a win bet. Sorry, I can't even read my own notes. But that's a great bet. And I would say that you can bet by groups. You can bet manufacturers, Chevy, Toyota, and Ford. And you could do an over-under on the number on the side of the car for the winner. The over-under is set at 17.5. Take the under.
Can you do an over-under on cautions? Because take the over after the last couple weeks. Racing.
Probably. But you know what the best part is? There will be live racing on American television in 2 days.
You know what's going to happen? They're going to tell you no fans, but a large selection of rednecks down there in South Carolina
They'll jump the fence.
Are going to be tailgating out there. It's
And,
happening.
I like, NASCAR is going to get a lot of eyes this weekend that usually don't watch the sport. And that's why I'm taking Chase Elliott at plus 1,000 for the win, because he is NASCAR's most popular driver.
Yes.
Especially in my household.
Hopefully we'll get the pool hall siren. Seth, I got something I want to talk about before we go to start bench cut. That's really important. Can you hold on? We're going to share my screen in a minute. Okay. Well, it says maybe my screen will crash. We'll find out what'll happen in a minute. All right, share me out. So
What did you say?
we need to talk about this.
You guys hate it. I don't really.
We need to cut. So we're gonna cut the Rams uniform.
I do like the patch. I like the patch.
I think I just lost my dinner. I hate it. It looks like some grade school kid just drew it on a piece of paper.
That's the patch is the worst part. All right, you know how we discussed the uniforms a couple shows ago, or was that last week? The blue uniform has the gradient numbers, like from the Hawks uniform from 1998. Look at that. It's got gradient. We're back in the 90s, right? And then that damn that bone-colored uniform, it's not white. It's like somebody dragged the uniform across your floor with and got it all dirt. Actually, I'll bring it up here again. I'm gonna hold on. There we go. Show that one out. So the bone uniform, you got like, it's not gray, it's not white, it's like off-white, like a color used for your wall of your living room. And then they have white striping on it and a white patch on the chest on a dirty uniform.
I could color a better uniform with Ella at 10:30 in the morning.
They're not even doing the horns on the bone uniform. What? So the Chargers look amazing, right? The Browns fix themselves. The Bucks even fix themselves. I don't know who signs off on this mess.
You're opening up a new stadium with that? Like, really?
It's Los Angeles.
You're right, Eric. I do care about it. Eric Frankel said on the Michael K show today, boo, they discussed uniform, wondered who cares about it. I care about it. I got to watch this crap.
No. If Eric Frankel wants to sit here and script out our show because it takes about an hour or so to do it, he's more than welcome to do it.
Script out our show. You're giving us too much credit.
If he
look at all those words. I mean, there's so many words on that paper.
Yeah, I got a few pages worth of notes. So Eric, if you don't like it, go somewhere else.
I was irrationally upset about this yesterday, but I'm not even saying it's irrational. How does this even happen?
What? The uniform?
Yes. How does it happen?
It's Los Angeles.
It's bad.
It's made for TV. What are you going to do?
It's not a national catastrophe. It's just a bad uniform. You really.
And Jason, they're not even going to play this year. It's okay.
You seem riled up about this. All right.
Yeah. Why are you so fired up? Settle down.
Yeah.
Have another Saturday. Calm down.
All right. As the de facto producer, I'm moving right along. Okay, start, bench, cut, stadium edition. And Eric, I was just joking. We love having you here.
My dogs are taking apart the couch. There's like pillows on the floor.
That's what it's come to, man. It's 5 months in the hole. You're done.
Okay, start, bench, cut, stadium, arena edition. This might take a while. We might go to 10 o'clock on the East Coast here, but what else do we have?
I got nothing but time, baby.
I got nothing but time either. And Eric Frankel does love the discussion, by the way. Eric, we love having you here. I was a little harsh. Please stay. One of our 10 viewers.
I know.
Okay, we're going to start with baseball. I mean, when I sat down and decided to do this with Jason, I got going on these baseball ones, and I thought I would only have about 3 or 4 different pictures. and that would be about 12 ballparks. But you could just keep going with baseball. You could absolutely keep going with baseball. So I got a few baseball, and we'll just move from there. Citizens Bank Park, Yankee Stadium, Citi Field. Easy one for me. Citi Field, by far, in my mind, by far is the better ballpark in New York. And in my mind, Citizens Bank Park is the best ballpark in America. So I'm keeping Citizens Bank Park and Citi Field and Yankee Stadiums going bye-bye.
I agree. I don't think Citizens Bank's the best in the country, but I agree with your rankings. Citi Field is the best in New York. It's better than Citizens Bank even. Citizens Bank's on my bench, and Yankee Stadium, the museum, is getting cut.
Too stale, too corporate, too stale.
There's nothing you need. There's nothing that when I go into Yankee Stadium, there's nothing about it that says, wow, this place is special.
I made this prediction. You and I have talked about this several times. We will see another Yankee Stadium in our lifetime, and I think we'll be in good enough shape where we'll be able to walk into it, and it will go on the ground to the old Yankee Stadium.
25 years. 25 years. Dan, what do you think?
I've been to all three. I like Citizens Bank. I think it's an accessible stadium. I think it was the funny thing about these three, right, is that Citizens Bank was first of those three. I find Citi Field to be too large for what it was, for what it's meant to be. There's like 17 clubs, and there's this, there's that, and you get lost in that place. Yankee Stadium, it is what it is, right? I mean, it's still the ballpark in the Bronx. The bat still stands across the street. I would probably in that group, I would start Citizens Bank, bench Yankee Stadium, and cut Citi Field. I just don't like the feel. I like the fact that, look, I will give the Mets credit, because when you're in the parking lot at Citi Field, they put little markers where the rubber and home plate and all the bases were at Shea. But Shea Stadium, flying into LaGuardia before they tore it down, and growing up, Citi Field tries to mash too many things together. They took too many ideas of ballparks that existed at the time and tried to mush them in. No offense.
Mush them in. Thanks.
But I'll tell you this though, like, I like standing next to the fence by the bullpen at Citi Field and watching the pitchers, do their thing. But at Citizens Bank, they had to. So when it first started, right, when Citizens Bank first opened in 2008, 2009, or was it before that? They had the visiting bullpen. They're tiered in right field, right? They had the visiting bullpen above the home bullpen, and because all those dickheads in Philadelphia were like throwing bottles down into the bullpen, they had to switch them.
The one thing I'll say, it's fair, Seth, what you're saying, because Citibank is a little contrived for a ballpark in the middle of a parking lot, right? Because they made all these wacky angles and what have you. The thing that all three of these parks lack is the outside experience. Citizens Bank and Citi are in parking lots, and the Yankee Stadium's in the middle of the Bronx.
Well,
they're really not good experiences out.
But to that point, right, you can still go to stands before you go to Yankee Stadium, right? If you want to go, for a pregame experience at Citi Field, what do? You go to McFadden's. Yeah. Same thing in Philadelphia, right? Or you could go get new rims for your car there at whatever it is, New Shea, Citi Field. And the thing was, it couldn't have been like, I'm not a Mets fan, I can go along with the Mets, whatever, but like in 2009, the economy takes a dump. Citi won't even put their name on the logo because they're in trouble, and the Yankees just rip off a World Series win with 100 and some odd wins, and everybody's happy, and they beat the Phillies, which is a division rival, right? So it's even worse. But the fact it's both stadiums, all three of them are inaccessible for if you left work at 5:00 in Manhattan. Right, which could you get to faster, Yankee Stadium or Citi Field?
Depends.
I think Citi Field.
Yeah, probably take the 7 train out,
Take
right?
the 7
So,
Express.
Yeah.
or you could fly in from Austin, Texas, and beat 3 guys who meet each other at Palisades Center Mall in Nyack, New York, at 3:00 in the afternoon.
Sit there in the
Go
parking
to
lot.
a bar in Midtown and still make it to the stadium
Yeah, no kidding.
before the 3 guys that met at 3:00 in the afternoon made it to Citi Field for a Yankees Mets weekend opener.
That was amazing.
I'll say this, and then we'll go on to the next one. I thought Citi Field was unnecessarily ripped in the beginning for tailoring their ballpark, or at least some of the designs and statues and mementos towards the Brooklyn Dodgers. The Mets, being a National League team, are really the only descendant of the Dodgers and the Giants. So I think they did a wonderful thing by paying tribute to Jackie Robinson and the Brooklyn Dodgers. I thought the Mets were the right team in the right ballpark to do that.
Look, when growing up, my dad had a picture of Ebbets Field right in his office in our house. And the exterior of Citi Field, if you were to put that against Ebbets Field, minus like the thing that says Ebbets Field on the outside, it looks exactly the same.
Yeah.
So I give him that. But my dad also has a picture of the old Yankee Stadium back, before all the upgrades in the 70s and whatnot. And that one Gate 4 exterior looks exactly like it used to back in the 1923, whatever. So both teams did a nice job with their exteriors. It's all about, there you go, right behind Jason there. I mean, it looks exactly like Ebbets Field. And I mean that, the exteriors are, and this goes back to our conversation from last week or the week before, where we're talking about ballparks that look back to the past to bring the game to today, right?
Yeah.
And I think they did a nice job. The Yankee Stadium experience is very sterile, and I think the Citi Field experience, and then we all hate Philadelphia, so it's a different experience. But I feel like wherever you are in all 3 stadiums, you get the team experience.
Matt made a good point, Soriano. He said he thinks Pittsburgh is among the best ballparks in the country. He might be right because it's similar to Philadelphia and it does have a neighborhood around it. So, what? I'll give him that. Pittsburgh's a pretty darn good experience.
I'll tell you this.
And
Go ahead.
you can walk to a casino from the ballpark.
That's always a plus. The food at Citi Field is unparalleled, by the way. Absolutely outstanding. However, losing Alex Anthony as the PA announcer is a travesty. Travesty. Takes a lot out of the atmosphere without him.
Mm-hmm.
Bring back Gallerstein.
I would agree. Okay, moving right along. Chavez Ravine, Kauffman Stadium, and the Rogers Center, a.k.a. the Sky Dome.
All right, another 3 ballparks that I have been to. All holistic experiences, but Dodger Stadium, start that all day. Kauffman, probably on the bench, and then cut Sky Dome, even though there's a hotel in it, and that's dope.
I've been to 2 of them. Dodger Stadium, Chavez Ravine, whatever you're calling it today, starts all day. That first of all, it's a classic. It's one of the older stadiums left. The view is outstanding. Holy God. Kauffman looks outstanding. I really want to go there. It's on my top 3 of ballparks I'd like to go. They've done a great job developing it through the years. Getting rid of that turf many years ago was a step in the right direction, right? But the outfield looks developed now. Great looking ballpark in the heart of another great barbecue town, right? So that's on my bench. Here's the thing. Sky Dome, definitely a modern marvel, right? When it was built. Just a wonder of the world. And at the time, I really wish I could have seen a game there with the roof open, because when we went, guys, it was snowing in April.
Yeah.
And we got to watch baseball still. I'm very grateful there was a dome, but I don't like indoor baseball at all. And it's a concrete shopping mall atmosphere. Yeah. And I wish I really am interested to know what that park has felt like in the World Series back in the day with it full. Because then it might be, the atmosphere could be great. But from just experience, I've got to cut it.
Dodger Stadium, for me, that's Americana. I mean, I think of 3 or 4 ballparks right now in baseball that have significant meaning to the game. Dodger Stadium, Wrigley Field, Fenway Park, and Camden Yards. Those are probably the 4 that I would put in that category. Kauffman Stadium's beautiful. I was out there, and for a stadium that's about 50 years old, they modernized it. The atmosphere was terrific. The wraparound 360-degree concourse, the waterfalls, the food, just the whole experience on its own, even though it's out in the suburbs and you got to drive a little bit to get there. They're talking about a downtown stadium, but I love Kauffman, so I'll put that on the bench. And to me, I enjoyed the time I spent with you guys up north of the border, but to me, the Rogers Center, it's just a cookie cutter at this point. So that's my order.
Yeah, and the coolest thing about Dodger Stadium is like in the left field stands, or like that. Can you put them back up again? Can you? Yeah. So that upper ring, right? That's where the ravine comes up. So when you enter the ballpark, you're like halfway between that upper deck and like the mezzanine, if you will. So like, there's like a, little plaza or whatever. So when you come into the ballpark for the first time, you kind of see it from above, especially if you park in left field. And, I always bagged on, Dodger fans not knowing the West Coast very well before I started traveling for work. And getting into that place is an absolute pain in the ass. And I was like, why do people leave, or why do people show up in the second inning and they leave in the seventh? If you've been to Los Angeles now, you know why.
The traffic is dreadful from what I hear. People complain about New York traffic at Yankee Stadium and Citi Field. I've heard it's far worse out there.
The other thing is, though, is like, oh, gee, it's another 70-degree day. Why? Well, let's go to the ballpark. Okay. And it's in a terrible location, but the other thing is when you're in the parking lot, like kind of on the third base line, you look over and there's a beautiful vista of downtown Los Angeles. And on a good night, you can see out to the Pacific. It's beautiful. You can see the planes, Jason, coming into LAX. I mean, it's a great place to be.
Moving right along. This is a tough one. Wrigley Field, Fenway Park, and Camden Yards. Ooh.
Oh,
Camden starts all day for me.
All day, all long.
So
I'd put Wrigley on the bench and I'd bag Fenway.
Ooh.
That's a tough one. I've been to both, and I
So two schools of thought, right? Wrigley and Fenway with their history. 100+ years old, they cancel each other out. So pick the one I like better. It would probably be Wrigley. But on the other hand, those are two historic ballparks, and I don't think I can dismiss one for that reason. I know how I feel about Fenway and Boston fans and that experience up there in general, but I think that to me is a historic park. So I probably have to put Wrigley and Fenway 1 and 1A. And I'm only benching Camden Yards because Camden Yards to me is going to be the next 100-year ballpark.
Right.
So I'm going to take the two historic ones.
I'll say this. If you sit in the field level at Fenway, different story. If you sit in the bleachers, terrible experience. Terrible.
It's not fair for me because I had a really good experience at a tour of Fenway, and I got to see the whole everywhere from the field to club box to the mock-your seats, and I got an appreciation for it in that sense, and I kind of understood it, how could you not? So I gotta take that, and I probably cut Wrigley. I don't know.
It's a tough choice. Wasn't easy. You could make arguments to cut any one of them, to tell you the truth. I once paid $150 at Fenway Park to stare at a pole.
That's a problem at Wrigley, too.
Same problem,
I'll tell you this. I have had fun at all three ballparks.
Yeah.
So
you're not.
Okay.
No, that's a tough one.
Moving right along. Yankee Stadium, the old Yankee Stadium, Polo Grounds, or Ebbets Field.
I've only been to one.
No shit.
Should we patch in John Sadowski?
Maybe. I'd be interested to get the Deacon's take on this.
Maybe Dan Cantor. Could hand the show over to them. I'll still have to produce
I
one.
think I'm a well. Yankee Stadium is the starter.
Oh, number one.
Yeah.
To me, this is easy. The Polo Grounds was ill-suited for baseball. Ill-suited for baseball.
Mm-hmm.
Yankee Stadium, Ebbets Field, Polo Grounds.
I like playing games of polo on MLB The Show, though.
Of course you do, because you're a lefty and you can hit it out of the ballpark from 255 feet away.
I can't. I can't. I couldn't even put one over the 150-footer at Champion Day Camp.
All right, what's next?
All right. Got a couple more baseball ones here.
I love baseball is the one so unique, right? Arenas are different. Baseball is, arenas can only be so unique. Baseball is the fun one.
This is actually the last
I
one.
can do this all day. Baseball.
Cookie Cutter, Shea Stadium,
Oh,
Veterans Stadium, or the Astrodome.
Oh, man.
the starter's actually easy here.
So, to me, the Astrodome was revolutionary for its time, so that's number one.
It's the eighth wonder of the world.
Shea Stadium
I don't like indoor
Stadium.
baseball. I'm sorry.
Oh, man, that was such a good experience.
No.
Shay, look at that dump.
But it was
But I
their
take-
club.
I
was
take
their
was-
club.
Shay. Shay's my starter. Matt, you cannot even argue anymore about our Yankee bias. Okay, I got Citi Field behind me, first of all, and I'm taking Shay as my starter. How about that?
No, granted, Shea Stadium is the only place you could sit in the blue seats in the mezz and see cars on fire in the parking lot.
To me, Veterans Stadium is just a slab of ugly concrete.
That's bad.
That's the worst of the cookie cutters.
They made a great improvement with Citizens Bank.
Oh, my God.
Oh my god.
So, out of the cookie cutters, Riverfront Stadium, Three Rivers,
Oof.
Busch Stadium, Veterans.
Busch, yeah.
Yeah, that's the worst.
Ooh.
So I'm going to take the Astrodome to start and Shea Stadium on the bench.
Yeah, I agree.
Just flip them. I'll take Shay to start.
The Astrodome had that board, way back, with like the Longhorns and all. I mean, how could you? I mean, Nolan Ryan pitched in the. I guess he pitched at Shea Stadium too, but I mean, he made his career at the Astrodome. Mike Scott, all those guys. The Astros are like the Oilers, right? In Houston, they were the best team that never won anything.
On to the NBA. Madison Square Garden, the TD Garden, Staples Center.
Ooh.
Madison Square Garden is the mecca of ball, right?
Listen, to me, there is no bigger venue and no bigger event in New York City when a team is going well than a Knicks game at Madison Square Garden.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'm taking the Garden.
It's the center of the universe.
It is. You can't not take Madison Square Garden. The TD Garden, I don't like that color change they just did with the seats.
Oh, terrible. It was unique. The yellow seats were a thing back to the Boston Garden. And they did it, and apparently the word on the street was they narrowed it up and fit some more seats in as well.
I think it's just one of those cookie cutter stale arenas from a distance. I've never been there. And Staples Center, I mean, the Lakers have had so much success there, and it's a who's who. The stars shine in La La Land, so to speak. So I'll go the Garden one. I'll take the Staples Center too.
I've been to Staples. It has uniqueness in its right, and the location is awesome. Comparative to MSG, awesome for LA. TD Bank is unremarkable at best, and it's not the best spot in Boston. Dan, would you say?
So if you're talking about like LA Live is amazing, right? When they built, the Ritz across the street and all that, where the Staples Center is. So things are improving around the TD Garden, and the other thing is like so. There's public transportation, obviously, right underneath Madison Square Garden, right? So you can get in from Jersey, you can get in from the outer boroughs, whatever. I mean, North Station here in Boston is right underneath the TD Garden. So from where I live, I can walk right down the street, get on a train, and be underneath that stadium in 45 minutes without having to, get in my car or without whatever. Right. And they've improved that area right around there with housing, entertainment. I mean, granted, all of this is before the plague, but they're appealing to what's interesting about, the situation we're in now is that the city of Boston was already sort of appealing to non-drivers, right? Because there was already a traffic problem. Same with New York. And instead of dealing with it with, congestion pricing and taxing and all that kind of thing, they tried to build the city up around where public transportation is, which is why like smart cities work like DC, Philadelphia to a lesser extent, LA is way behind on all that. But, anywhere you are in the city of Boston, you can take the train to the arena. Same in New York. You cannot do that in Los Angeles. So I think that would dictate part of, how you approach this, because the TD Garden in Boston is bigger than Madison Square Garden in New York, because it's like the spot in that part. It's TD Garden and it's Fenway, and that's it.
For me, the public transportation part doesn't impact the game experience, right? So I really don't. I don't.
It's because you live in Texas.
Well,
you bought a pickup truck and now you go everywhere, with your shotgun.
Definitely don't have either one of those items.
Right. I got a layup here for you.
And not that I'm against having a firearm. I would shoot myself in the hand. I want to just be clear on what I believe in. You can have your firearm. I'm a liability. All right. Cool.
Thank you for making that clear, Joe Biden.
Boston Garden, Chicago Stadium, or Brendan Byrne Arena.
Oh, Brendan Byrne. Why did you do that?
AKA Continental, AKA Izod. Because I knew this segment would take a lot of time, and I needed something to move us along.
I did. I went to a lot of games at Brendan Byrne, and they were hockey games. One of my good childhood friends, Brian Lee, his father brought us all the time to Devil games. So even though I have to absolutely cut Brendan Byrne here, as it is just awful, looking back, I still have I just want to state on the record the soft spot in my heart for Brendan Byrne. I was there a lot growing up. Okay, so it's just bad. That one, Seth, that one concourse where the upper and lower let out on, during intermissions or after the game, you couldn't walk. Talk about social distancing. Jesus, like you were running on top of people, and it wasn't even full. Like they would draw 10,000 people to a Devil game, and you couldn't walk in the concourses. It was absolutely atrocious for a modern arena.
So, listen, I always thought that arena, it was ugly from the outside, and there was nothing to it on the inside. But I thought the sight lines were pretty darn good. I didn't think it was as bad of a building as people made it out to be. But when you compare it to the Boston Garden and Chicago Stadium, Garden 1, Chicago Stadium 2, and then I'm cutting Brendan Byrne 3. Damn.
Yeah, Matt had a good point. It was so steep in the upper deck in Brendan Byrne. If you had the lower level, the sight lines were fine. Once you hit that upper level, you were like upside down by the time you were in the last 5 rows. And a spacesuit to get there.
Right.
All right. Moving right along. Back to the NASCAR segment of our show. I'm sure this chat will take about 25 minutes.
All right, we have.
I'll let you guys. I can't contribute to this.
So the World Center of Racing, Daytona. We have the site in the lower right-hand corner of this week's race in Darlington, South Carolina. An egg-shaped track, right? 2 of the turns are much more narrow than the.
That's right.
It's very unique, and it's because there's a lake in the area that they had to build, or a pond, right? So that made it really unique. And then you have the last great.
Take me off for a second.
Got it. We have the last great Coliseum, Bristol Motor Speedway, the shortest track on the circuit at a half mile, right? And it's high banked and it's short track racing, and they built it to where there's like 150,000 people and stands, and it feels like an arena, and it's loud, and it's really awesome racing. So this is a tough one. I've only been to one of them, which is Daytona. It's a mecca, right? It's a 2.5-mile track, and it's in Daytona, Florida, the birthplace of NASCAR. It's awesome. Darlington's one of the oldest tracks on the circuit. It's unique, like I said, in its own right. And Bristol is a modern-day classic in the NASCAR sense. So it's a tough one for me. But I'm going with the history of Darlington first. Dan, I'm going Darlington first. History, old track. I am going to go Bristol second because of the racing that it provides. And I'm actually going to cut Daytona, which seems like a travesty. But it's good.
I got to go with the expert here. But, the NASCAR does everything backwards from the NFL, right? Their biggest races at the beginning of the year. Daytona is a spectacle. Darlington's going to get it restarted this year. Bristol is unique in its own right. That's a tough call, but I'm going to agree with Jason.
Moving right along. College basketball. Cameron Indoor, Hinkle Fieldhouse, or Rupp Arena?
Cameron is right. Krzyzewskiville, right? Everybody waiting outside. I've always wanted to see a game there. I've done some work in North Carolina where I've actually asked people to get me tickets to that, and they've not. You got to get down there. It's just the hoops are held from the ceiling. How could you not want to be there, right? What an experience. ACC hoops. And then I would put Rupp behind that, and then whatever. Everybody else is sort of secondary.
I'd probably go Rupp 1 just because of the depth of the history there, and then Duke in terms of what they've done over the last 30 years with Coach K. The court's named after him. Hinkle Fieldhouse, I've been in love with Hinkle Fieldhouse ever since I watched the movie Hoosiers. But I think if you're looking at all of them on equal footing, you probably have to take Kentucky and Duke 1A, and then Hinkle Fieldhouse would probably be the third.
Yeah, I wouldn't, if I were in any of those towns or nearby and someone gave me tickets to the game, I wouldn't turn them away.
No, not at all. Not at all. All right, on to the NFL stadiums. Here we go. Jerry World, Mercedes-Benz, or MetLife and MetLife.
What a layup.
MetLife's gone. It looks like a giant air conditioner.
It's gone. Oh. What a freaking disaster. Could you have fucked it up anymore?
It is a disappointment. I've been on the field at MetLife. I've been in seats that are, thank God, covered at MetLife. And what's weird about the first level there is that the first level at MetLife behind the end zone sort of becomes the second level.
Yeah.
And there's like a wall. So it doesn't go all the way around because God forbid you impede on the suites that they had to build into that stadium. MetLife, I'd rather Mercedes-Benz. I really want to get into that place. I want to look around, check it out. Chick-fil-A Saturday. Unfortunately, never going to get to Atlanta again.
And the concessions are cheap.
They are, and they're on purpose.
And prices.
Why wouldn't they? And we've seen Jerry World. AT&T is like a pimple on the face of the earth. But man, what a spectacle that place is.
You said it. It's a spectacle. It's overpowering. So I would take that number one. I actually went on a tour of the Mercedes-Benz Arena. Mercedes-Benz Stadium. I was on a business trip in Atlanta, and I had about 5 hours to kill, and I went to the airport, and I actually decided, with luggage in tow, I actually took a subway, the MARTA, all the way back to the CNN Center. Awesome. And carrying my luggage over my shoulder, I actually went, and I paid for it myself. I didn't expense it to the company. I actually went on a tour of the Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and it was over the top, and I thought it was a beautiful stadium. But like two-thirds of that tour was the tour guide talking about how much Arthur Blank was revered in Falcons land and his Gullwing Club, and how ostentatious it was, and how somebody like me will never get a chance to go in there.
especially since he drafted Michael Vick.
The freaking Falcons, for God's sakes, they haven't won anything. Where do they get off acting like this?
28-3. 28-3.
So I'm gonna go Jerry World 1, Mercedes-Benz 2, and goodbye to MetLife.
You convinced me. I was going to go the other way, but these freaking Falcons should not have any kind of chip on their shoulders. What the hell?
Atlanta sucks anyway. The varsity is the only thing that saves that city.
Here's another easy one.
God.
FedEx.
He wants to blow that thing up.
Tells you where I'm leading. FedEx.
They're taking seats out of it.
FedEx, Superdome, or Soldier Field. Listen, FedEx is gone. I actually went to FedEx with my cousin in December, and I actually didn't. It wasn't as bad as people made it out to be. It's still a dump.
No, it's terrible, Seth. I mean, you're out in the middle of nowhere.
Oh, the location is horrible. The place is falling into disrepair. I mean, the Superdome to me is number one. Soldier Field, it's not the original Soldier Field, but it does look like a nice stadium. So I'll take Soldier Field. Number two, and FedEx is gone.
I'm with you.
Yeah, I mean, Soldier Field is, on West Shore. What is it, West Shore Drive there, or Lakeshore Drive in Chicago? I mean, that's a beautiful setup. I mean, the Superdome. There's a reason they have the Sugar Bowl there every year, and I mean, FedEx is just such a terrible shithole that it should. It's hard to get to.
I think they're going to build a new stadium while we're talking about it. You think we're already there?
I mean, they could, but the thing is like this is going back 10, 15 years. The Redskins offered to build a stadium in Arlington, Virginia, right near National Airport, right? Yeah. And they were like their condition was that they build a metro station right near the stadium, and everyone in the neighboring area before it got very dense rejected it because it was a traffic problem. And where FedEx would have been right outside of Crystal City, there is now a Target, a grocery store, a PetSmart, a Don Julio's, and like a Chili's or something.
What about the Crystal City Sports Pub, which you and I frequented?
Yeah, that would have been the place to be before a Giants-Redskins game had it been in that location. Because after 15 Miller Lights, you could have walked to the stadium.
Right.
But
I lived in Virginia for 8 months, and the social highlight of my time in Virginia in 8 months was meeting Dan Sadowski at the Crystal City Sports Pub when he had a plane to catch.
Pub is fantastic.
I always, I make time for my friends. What can I say?
It was right around Christmas time too.
I feel like there was a playoff game on that day.
Was there?
No,
maybe.
I don't know.
Maybe it was. I don't remember very much, but
I appreciate that. So thank you.
That was a good time. All right, moving right along. I don't know why I came up with this one. Old Foxborough Stadium, the Metrodome, or Cleveland Municipal Stadium.
Oh shit! Well,
Too bad we don't have Ray Martell here. He could give us the.
I've only seen the Metrodome while the roof was collapsing. I've only been to the old Foxborough for a concert and sat in the worst seats in the place. And I've never been to Cleveland. So I'm going to recuse myself from this one.
I don't know.
I think Foxborough would have been a good spot to see football, even though like those sides, if you were in the top of those, sideline seats, you were far away from the field.
I suppose Foxborough, the mistake by the lake, and then the Metrodome.
The problem with the Metrodome was that it wasn't anywhere like kind of near the city. I don't know.
Absolutely no atmosphere in the Metrodome.
Yeah, it's mixed use, right? I mean, the Twins played there and all that.
I feel like those old stadiums at least had some charm.
Yeah, the mistake by the lake, while it was awful for baseball, it probably was a hell of an experience for football in the cold and everything and the wind.
Yeah, it just smells like peanuts and old beer.
Dirty water dogs. Yeah.
Oh, Lambeau
Arrowhead, Hard Rock Stadium.
So I've been to Arrowhead. Incredible experience.
That sounds like that would be so much fun.
Loud. Lot of, and this is so Arrowhead's in the same parking lot as Kauffman Stadium, right there, kind of where the interstates meet. I'll tell you a funny story about Arrowhead, right? I went to a game there. They were playing the Texans, a division rival, and two guys in front of I had flown in that morning, was meeting a buddy of mine who also flew in that morning from another city, and there were two guys there, and they started jawing at each other. And one guy's wearing a Texans jersey, the other guy's wearing a Chiefs jersey. This was the Alex Smith era, when they were like 9-0, 10-0, 11-0, when they were still trying to get after that perfect record. And very accessible stadium. Don't get me wrong, beautiful, very loud. But like these two guys are going at each other, and they're like, oh. And then at the end, the Kansas City Chiefs fan looks at the guy and goes, "I'm sorry." I was like, that would never happen in the NFC East, my friend.
Someone would have left in handcuffs, and someone would have left with a black guy.
Right. I think they went through the metal detector like arm in arm. It was very odd.
That's funny.
So
and I've always wanted to go to Lambeau.
Lambeau, number one. None of these stadiums hold a candle to Lambeau, but Arrowhead, from what I've heard, is the loudest stadium in the NFL.
So loud.
Them in Seattle, right? They're the top two.
Yeah.
Well, the good thing about the thing about Arrowhead is that they do it without that weird overhang.
Yeah.
So there's just so much noise that generates and comes down on the field. And I'm not gonna lie, I had good seats for that game, and it is loud. Like we were behind the away bench for the Texans, and Andre Johnson's sister was in the row behind us, and we were like, What? Yeah, it's like you couldn't even hear each other because it was so loud. And they have a decibel meter on the jumbotron.
All right, one more. Montreal 4, Maple Leaf Gardens, Joe Louis Arena.
Well, I've been to the Joe, but not the other two, unfortunately.
You two are the hockey experts. I will let you.
The Forum. Scary place to play for opponents. You can't go in. You couldn't go in there and win. The home ice advantage was legit. So I'm going with the Forum. I'm just gonna. I've heard the Maple Leaf Gardens is fantastic, but I went to the Joe, and definition of hockey barn, totally a dump, but a glorious dump. Talk about stale beer smell. That entire place smelled like stale beer and peanuts. It was phenomenal. I got to see 2 games there when I lived in Michigan, and it really was cool. So I am going to put that on my bench and cut Maple Leaf in this instance.
So the 2 Canadian ones cancel each other out.
Yeah, Maple Leaf does still stand, Matt. Yeah, it's still. I think the Forum is a museum too at some parts of it.
Dan.
Again, I would say I would put Maple Leaf Gardens at the top just because of the history, Montreal behind that, and then Detroit is Detroit. They improved, and that's a tough one, but that's where I'm going.
Jason did the hockey one, so that was really well done and thought out.
That was great. Hey, Seth, we have a breaking news story from the news desk.
The news desk. Okay.
The news desk. Did you know we had one of those? This is
I didn't know that was in the budget. I guess
Grand Central Sports news alert. The Giants' DeAndre Baker has a arrest warrant out for him for 4 charges of armed robbery and aggravated assault. He was in Florida with Seattle Seahawks quarterback Quentin Dunbar and partying Wednesday night when an argument broke out, and they pointed a semi-automatic weapon at 2 others, took their money and valuables from 2 other people in attendance.
Why are Giants cornerbacks stealing from other people?
Why are we out partying when we should be quarantining and
doing virtual workouts?
It's because it's Florida.
So Plaxico Burress would be very, very pleased at this. He's probably already bailed them out, I hope.
Has anyone fired a weapon yet? And
not
themselves?
It's coming. What are you doing? You make millions. What are you doing?
Yeah.
This is just the story the Giants need in a non-sports time to really get ready for the coming season. Yeah. It's like a boat trip. Why is Miami? Why Why does Miami keep, or Southern Florida, Central Florida, keep playing such an integral role in the Giants' future success? I don't understand. Too many distractions, my friends.
Well said. Well said. We'll see how the league responds.
See how the authorities respond.
Yeah. True. All right. On this day,
Yes. Love this part.
Senators pitcher Walter Johnson ends a record scoreless streak at 56 innings. And on this day, by the way, Johnson won his 300th game against the Tigers.
Wow. 300. That ain't going to happen in our lifetime.
No, I wanted to get
Never
the
again.
Senators. I wanted to get the Senators hat. It had the nice cursive Senators on the back.
Yeah.
But the problem is they only had small and medium. And as you can tell, my head,
The large melon.
there's nothing small and medium about this. So.
Just wait for the season to start. Go down and get your own.
1918, this day in 1918, Sunday baseball was made legal in Washington, D.C.
Thank God.
1967, Mickey Mantle hits his 500th home run off of Stu Miller of the Orioles. 72, Willie Mays, who was a shell of himself at that point, debuts as a Met. His homer beats the Giants 5-4. Mays, of course, played his final 2 seasons with the Mets. 77 for you hockey gurus. Jacques Lemaire scores twice. Canadians beat the Bruins 2-1 in overtime at the Boston Garden for a 4-game sweep and back-to-back Stanley Cup titles. 1996, May 14th, 1996, Jason, what happened?
May 14th, 1996?
Come on, we were just watching it virtually the other day. We were texting about it.
The Habs won their 6th cup.
Doc Gooden threw his
Oh,
no-hitter.
yeah. No, that was great to have on that. Yeah.
Doc Gooden threw his
he did.
no-hitter. And then Dan's favorite day, in 2018, the Supreme Court strikes down a federal law banning sports gambling in most states.
Thank goodness.
Thank you, John Roberts.
Final thoughts before we go.
Diamond?
Look, we're again, this show is a public service. I think anyone who listens to it will benefit from it. It's something that breaks from the everyday, and we're almost there. And sports is coming back. And this weekend, we're going to get cars on the track in South Carolina. And every day we hear something about the NBA or the NHL or MLB or whatever it is, right? Let's not lose focus. There's a lot of things going on out there, and we just have to keep our heads about us. That's all.
I'm optimistic. Every day it seems like there's something better coming out in the news, and New Jersey now opening the beaches for Memorial Day, and retail starting to open up curbside pickup. And as quickly as everything was locked down, slowly and surely the pieces of the onion peels are being peeled back here now, so that we're starting to get some positive news.
Seth, I'll see you in Wildwood for Memorial Day weekend. I'm really looking forward to that, as well as the racing this weekend and for the weeks to follow. Hopefully it goes off without a hitch. We don't have any complications. If it does, we're in for the next 4 races being pretty spectacular, and some really good time to take up of your week. So let's see what's in store for us this coming week, but we know we have that, and we'll see you back out here in a week.
We got another great guest coming up next week.
Oh,
Voice of the New York Knicks, the radio voice of the New York Knicks, Ed Cohen.
Yeah, buddy.
Who I went to
Good
school
job. That's
Ithaca
oh
College.
yeah.
I'm 03, he's 05. Radio voice of the New York Knicks. Great guy.
Oh, another Ithaca guy? Oh,
Another
boy.
Ithaca guy.
You gonna wear your IC hats?
Listen, we're all over the place in New York City. It all started out with Bruce Beck. I mean, for us broadcasters
Yeah,
in New York
Bruce
City,
Beck.
Bruce Beck.
Oh, he's OG.
Bruce Beck is like the
Oh, geez.
OG Ithaca, baby.
Bruce
I
Beck
love
is
it.
like the broadcasting god for Ithaca College people like me, because he started it all.
Bruce Beck at the
Beck.
MSG Sports Desk.
As for Bob Page, he's not around anymore.
Wow, Bruce did it too. Bruce did it.
Bruce, yeah.
When,
Bruce. Brendan Burke, the voice of the Islanders.
Oh,
when did we get Bill Pito on?
Bill Pito, another Ithaca guy.
Is he really?
Bill
He's an
Pino
Ithaca guy? No.
Bill Pino's an Ithaca guy. Yep. John Rothstein, the CBS College Basketball
Yeah.
Insider. Chris Moore, host on WFAN.
You guys are the best. Look at you guys.
There are a lot
Lineage
of us.
of Ithaca.
You know, we don't have the pomp and circumstance, and we don't pump our chest out like the Syracuse people.
I was going to say, you're shoving it right up Syracuse's ass.
You know what, Don? But you know what? Listen, there are a lot of us. We've infiltrated New York City, and here I am doing nights on Sirius and WFAN. So maybe I can.
Upstate always finds a way to win.
So maybe I can have a little piece of that pie as well. So. All right,
I gotta go put my couch back together because someone built a fort out of it while we've been on air.
Always fun, guys. I'll see you next week. Be well.
See you next week.
All right.
Be good or be good at it. No.